the big problem of science is not a very good storyteller, but humans are motivated to action by the stories, not by the facts. What are the main issues that concern voters in the United States, in Europe, in other parts of the world? So immigration is one of the top issues everywhere, whereas climate change, many people just deny it. The attraction of immigration it's a biological drama. The drama that we live in one tribe and suddenly somebody comes from another tribe to our territory, this is something that is familiar to chimpanzees and to wolves and to rabbits. Oh, there is these strange rabbits coming here. They will take our grass. They understand it. It's very, very deep.
Als ich Yuval Noah Harari treffe, fällt mir seine außergewöhnliche Präzision beim Beobachten seiner Umgebung auf. Mit Humor und messerscharfem Verstand versucht er, die Welt zu durchdringen und den Diskurs zu globalen Herausforderungen unserer Zeit mit anzustoßen. Harari ist Autor, Historiker und Philosoph, promovierte in Oxford und ist Professor für Geschichte an der Universität in Jerusalem. Eine kurze Geschichte der Menschheit, Homo Deus sowie Nexus wurden zu Weltbestsellern. Seid dabei, wenn ich Yuval Noah Harari treffe. Welcome to The Book of My Life. My name is Jagoda Marinic. I'm a writer and host of the show, and I'm happy to lead you through a conversation about books, life, and the world. My today's guest is a very special guest who's deeply into explaining and understanding this world. Welcome to the show, Yuval Harari.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. And I'm very curious because I have been listening to your interviews, reading your books like so many people. And I'm interested to find out about the role that reading played in your life. When did you understand that books will have this important role that they have in your life?
I began to read it at a very early age. I think the first book I've read, surprisingly enough, was A History of the World for children. It's this huge book full of images and paintings, and I can still kind of remember now many of the images in that book about people in the Stone Age and medieval knights on crusade and things like that.
And do you remember your age?
I was like 4 years old. At first I just looked at the pictures. I didn't read the book, and I asked my parents to help me decipher what are the signs next to the pictures, and then I read it like, I don't know, probably hundreds of times. Like I would go over it again and again and again. From history went actually to mythology. So I had another book which really influenced me, which was, I think, Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology, and it had no pictures in it. This was just text, just words. But the words formed these also incredibly powerful images of, people turning into trees and gods creating things out of nothing. And it really kind of lit up my imagination.
How old were you then?
Probably it was a few years later. I suppose I was like 7 or 8.
So may I try to imagine this young 7-year-old boy? So, you must have had tons of other books with fairy tales and things that are more child appropriate, as we say today. And but then what would stick to your fantasy as a kid was actually the real history and the mythology.
The two things I'm still dealing with right now as an author and as a scholar.
Right. Yeah.
But these are the ways that we try to explain the world to ourselves.
And were you fascinated by the other books as well, or were you so focused as a child already?
No, I read a lot of books. I've read basically every book we had. We didn't have a big library at home, but we had a couple of, I guess, dozen books, quite eclectic. And I just read all of them, without exception. Some quite strange ones, I guess, as well.
Do you remember the funniest book you read as a kid? The book that made you laugh?
There weren't many fun. There were a couple of books by an Israeli satirist, Efraim Kishon. So we had like 2 or 3 of his books, and I also read and reread them, quite a number, and they were funny, but probably they had not as much as impact as the mythology and the history.
So for many people, it's you either like science or you like the storytelling. So with you, it was very early that you seemed to want to connect these things. So let me first understand, why was mythology so important for you as a kid?
Yeah, it was instinctive. It was just, trying to understand the world. And the way that humans try to understand the world at first was mythology. I mean, this is the way that people thousands of years ago try to understand why the things are as they are, the mysteries of the universe, of the human body, of the human mind. So mythology was the main vehicle. And humans are storytelling animals. We think in stories so that they come more easily to us. It's much, when you reach, say, the 21st century and you read the latest books about, say, quantum mechanics, trying to explain to you how the universe works on a physical level, or you read books in cell biology and genetics. This is so complicated. I mean, our brains are really not really evolved or adapted to thinking in those terms. This is why you need to kind of spend years and years in university and rely on complex mathematical equations. And even then, it's like, it's at a distance. It's extremely difficult to actually internalize what this means because it's not the way that our minds function.
That's something that you like to stress, that it's more complex than many people would like to have it.
Much more complex than mythology. I mean, the basic, and when I think about science and I think about mythology, what strikes me is science is far, far more imaginative, far more wild, far more surprising than any mythology that humans ever managed to create. Most human mythology is taking the basic, dramas from our personal lives and just kind of inflating them. So, the gods, like in Greek mythology, they're basically a squabbling family. And the type of arguments that as a kid, maybe you hear between your father and mother, so you read it in the mythology, this is Zeus and Hera. Or the way that they fight or punish the children. And, this goes even to the deepest layers of later, say, Jewish and Christian mythology, that the entire kind of Jewish identity is saying that we are Father's favorite children. That's it. Which is the type of thing that, in every family, kids would squabble, father loves me more than he loves you. And you find entire nations that build their identity around this story. Or you think about how Christian theologians explain what hell is. So, on one level, they will say, okay, demons roast you alive in burning sulfur and fire for millions of years. But then on a deeper level, they will say hell is being cut off, disconnected from God, which is the deepest fear of every child and actually of every mammal offspring, to lose touch with the parents. Because if an offspring of a mammal, a human being or a chimpanzee or a porcupine or a dolphin, loses connection with their mother or with their parents, they die. There is nobody to provide food. There is nobody to take care of them. So, you can think of the whole of this kind of Christian theology, basically the idea of a lost child crying for their parents. And so in this sense, mythology is very deep emotionally, but in terms of understanding the universe, there is something very shallow about it, because it simply takes the biological dramas that have been scripted by evolution about the life of children and families and friendships, and just kind of inflates it to think this is the whole universe works like my family. The whole universe works like our village. And things like quantum mechanics say, no, they don't. I mean, a certain part of the universe, like the biological lives of mammals, they work that way, but most of the universe doesn't. Even if you just move from mammals, like this rabbit here.
Yeah, it's really, this rabbit, it doesn't move anymore.
Yeah, for the mammals, simply you take a small step to the reptiles, it's already a completely different story. Like you think about, I don't know, turtles. So you have this kind of image of the turtle mother coming from the sea. She digs a hole in the sand. She lays their eggs, I don't know, like 40 or 50 eggs. She covers the hole, and then she goes back to sea, and that's it. This is what Freud would have to deal with if he was treating turtles.
Yeah.
Because there is no longer any connection afterwards between the mother has done her bit. She's not a mammal, so she doesn't suckle the young, she doesn't protect them, nothing. She is in the sea doing her things, forgot about it, and then a couple of weeks later, the young turtles, the baby turtles come out, and they go out to the sea, and then all these birds come and eat them, and all these fish come and eat them, and maybe out of the 50 turtles, maybe 2 or 3 survive, and they will be the next generation. They have never any connection with their, certainly not with their father, and also not with their mother. So what would turtle mythology be like? Like this whole fear of Christian theology, maybe I'm cut off from my father, it makes no sense to turtles. And this Jewish obsession, father loves us more than anybody else, it makes no sense to turtles. Parents don't love their children at all. For us, are like the deepest core of our psychology. And you still have wars, like the wars raging right now in my country. The war between Israelis and Palestinians, it's still fueled by this biological, mythological drama that we are God's favorite children, both sides.
But isn't that which humans claim makes them so special? The fact that they can invent a story, the fact that they can connect differently and imagine differently.
So yeah, what's different in us from rabbits and probably even elephants and chimpanzees is that we, with language, we can create stories.
Yeah.
And we have incredible imagination, but the thing is that the basic scripts
of the imagination is always
of our
the same.
stories, of our imagination, are still constrained by our mammalian biology. So you have these incredibly complex mythologies and poems and movies and TV series. But when you look at what is the actual plot is taken from biology. It's something that in essence even the rabbits will understand. So whether
Not sure.
Whether it's Christian theology, whether it's the plays of Shakespeare, whether it's like TV series like Succession. Have you watched the Succession?
I don't watch series because I feel like I've seen them all. I understand
because
your
it's
argument,
actually like there are 10 plots that evolution scripted. And we kind of just retell the same plots again and again in incredible variations, but they are the same basic plots.
I agree.
And science works outside these plots. I mean, quantum mechanics is not a biological drama. It's so different from anything in our kind of experience as children, as family members, as members of a community, that again, with the help of mathematics and with the help of computers, we can somehow approach it, and so much of the world is built on top of these scientific theories and models. But psychologically and also politically, they leave us completely cold. It's very hard to inspire people to do anything by telling them E equals mc squared, or by showing them the equations of quantum mechanics.
Yeah, Because they do need, for action, they do still need the activation of the biological drama. That's what you say, yeah.
And for good or for bad. It can, it can lead to acts of charity and compassion and incredible bravery. And it can lead to wars and persecution. And, almost all persecutions in the world, whether of ethnic minorities, whether of gay people, whether of anybody, it's basically taking the disgust mechanism, which, again, evolution provided all mammals, including rabbits, with a disgust mechanism, because, especially as children, we like to explore the world, and we explore the world a lot with our mouth. We try to eat different things, and if we eat something poisonous or a source of pollution that could make us sick, we could die. So evolution equipped us with a disgust mechanism. This disgust mechanism is quite flexible, so often parents need to teach children what to be disgusted from. Like that feces or somebody vomited or things like that. Oh, this is disgusting.
Before we go into the books you brought, I want to know one thing. You must have been 7 or 11 when you read those mythological stories, and you didn't know anything. You were not the smart man you are today. So you were a kid finding out first. So what was it back then that moved your energy into fascination of mythology? What was the feeling you could connect with?
Again, I think it's the kind of yearning to understand how the world works.
So the myth did give you a feeling that you are getting deeper into knowledge about the world.
Yes, it's a question whether it's misleading, or whether it really gives you insight into at least how part of the universe works. But of course, myth is also very dangerous. It's very tempting, but it's very dangerous. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, people fight entire wars and kill millions of people just because of mythology. So it's an extremely powerful but dangerous.
Did you feel
thing.
that back then, that it's dangerous also?
At age 7 or 8, I was just fascinated by the stories. I mean, you don't understand how it really kind of shapes your mind decades to the future. These fairy tales and legends and mythologies, and you obviously don't understand the kind of dangerous political and social constructs that are built on top of these mythologies. You often then spend your entire life basically unlearning these fairy tales and myth that you've heard as a young child. I mean, they're incredibly powerful.
Fear creating also.
This is how you then look at the world when you're 20, when you're 40, when you're 16. And if you're fed the wrong stories, the wrong mythologies, then 50 years later you're Putin. This can lead to the death and misery of millions of people. It all starts in the mind. Very few wars in history were about objective things or problems in the world. People think that people fight for the same reason that rabbits and turtles and chimpanzees fight, that we fight over food and we fight over territory. And this is almost never the case. Over the last few thousand years, we have become so powerful as a species that it's not difficult to provide our basic biological needs. We don't really need to fight over territory, and we don't really need to fight over food or resources. Again, if I look at my country, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not about land. There is enough land between the Mediterranean and Jordan to build houses and schools for everybody. It's definitely not about food. There is enough food. There is enough water. There is enough energy. There is all the objective resources. There is enough. But in the mind of people, they believe in fantasies, in mythologies, in stories that are incompatible. And again, they say, and both sides say, God gave us this whole place. We cannot compromise on God's love. We cannot compromise on God's gift. I mean, if it was up to us, no problem. We can give you half. But God gave it. We can't overrule what God said.
But is there also a dilemma in your own work, research, thinking, that on the one hand you see the mythology as a critical energy, let's say, in our collective consciousness, but on the other hand you also say that the most people do not react to the facts in science?
The big problem of science is not a very good storyteller, but humans are motivated to action by the stories, not by the facts. What are the main issues that concern voters in the United States, in Europe, in other parts of the world? So immigration is one of the top issues everywhere, whereas climate change, many people just deny it. The attraction of immigration it's a biological drama. The drama that we live in one tribe and suddenly somebody comes from another tribe to our territory, this is something that is familiar to chimpanzees and to wolves and to rabbits. Oh, there is these strange rabbits coming here. They will take our grass. They understand it. It's very, very deep.
But though on the level of myth, the extinction of mankind through natural disaster has also been a biological drama at display in the Bible, you know. So I wonder why with immigrants it works and with natural disaster it doesn't.
Because in the Bible, the process that happens is that humans sin and then God punishes them for their sin by unleashing a flood. And you would see that a lot of the conversation around climate change, it goes to that story of guilt. That people feel guilty. Oh, I did this, and therefore the world is collapsing. And it's much more difficult to go beyond this kind of biblical narrative of sin and punishment and forget about this. Understand the mechanisms, the ecological mechanisms and the physical mechanisms that we are dealing with, which are not really these sin punishment mechanisms with God as the intervening actor.
Though much of the rhetoric of climate activists is within the sin mechanism.
Exactly, because this is they reach out for a story, and this is the closest story they can find. That again, it's go back to children and parents. We are bad children. We did something wrong. Father is punishing us. So this is something that people can easily understand. I took too many flights last year. I'm a bad boy. God will punish us with climate change. This is something that people kind of instinctively connect to.
And then they dislike it because they're guilty and they don't want to feel guilty.
It's not that they don't want to feel guilty, because guilt is powerful. You know, Christianity has become the most successful religion in history, and it's built on guilt. So guilt is not something kind of... people, in a way, they like to feel guilty. But if we really want to deal with climate change, then thinking about it in terms of personal guilt is the wrong way. We need to understand, again, the systems at work. And the main problem is not with the decisions of individual people. It's the way that the economy is built. It's the way that the political system is built. I mean, the action needs to come from corporations and from governments, which are bureaucratic entities. This is the organizing principle. We have no mythologies about bureaucracy. This is something that most people don't understand, how bureaucracies work. So you have some artists, like Kafka is the most famous, but he's not the only one, who try to explain to people this new reality of the world works on the basis of bureaucratic systems. But again, psychologically and mythologically, it's very difficult because, you know, bureaucracies are documents and protocols and forms and lists. It doesn't work on stories. And to understand, like, when was the last time you saw a movie or read a novel about the budget? Not about somebody who works in the budget department, about the budget, like as the hero. Like you try to understand Germany in 2024, you try to understand climate change. How does the budget works? From one perspective, this is one of the most important things about our life. But nobody writes about it. There are no television shows. It's boring.
How would you say bureaucracy affects the human being today? Or the fact, if you say that this
How long do you have to wait for a doctor's appointment? This is sometimes a life and death question, and this is determined by bureaucratic principles. Now, again, people could understand it if they translate it into some kind of sin and punishment narrative or some kind of child-parent narrative. But this is not how bureaucracy works. And we need a completely different set of stories to understand bureaucracy. Again, people like Kafka began to try and formulate these stories.
I think
but
he
for
didn't just begin. I think he captured a deep aspect of it.
See, just in terms of numbers, for every Kafka novel,
You will be back
how
at
many
1,000
novels
non-Kafka
are
novels.
there about two boys fighting over a girl?
But you don't need like 100 Mona Lisas to have the knowledge of a Mona Lisa. You know, I mean, one Kafka is enough, I think. You might be right intellectually, but I feel challenged by the danger you see in stories, but I completely can follow your argument. Though I mostly see the liberating part, the stories
It
also
depends
can
what
have.
the story is. I mean,
Yeah.
the key point is stories are incredibly powerful. And like every powerful thing, you can use them well and you can use them for evil purposes.
So you think a debate that is not taking place is actually thinking about the bureaucratic and the structural, I mean, like United Nations and all the structures we have to solve the problem.
We don't understand the structures. I mean, this is one of the reasons you have all these conspiracy theories that people believe. That, you have a small group of billionaires controlling everything and starting wars and epidemics, because this is something that we can understand. This goes back to the mythology. This goes back to, the parents, they do everything. It's like thinking that the world have like a small number of parents, and maybe they are bad parents, and they are punishing us, and they are doing bad things. It's easy to understand these conspiracy theories. It's much, much more difficult to understand the reality. There is no small group of people who understand and control everything. There is this huge, sprawling, bureaucratic system, which is not evil. It's doing what it's doing, but if we want to make a significant change in the world, like deal with climate change, we need to work with and through the bureaucracy. If we get stuck in these simplistic mythological narratives.
I completely agree with you, and I understand, and I'm glad you bring this up. So, but last thing you have to tell me, the book you read between 15 and 18, the books, and not scientific.
Okay, let me think. I mostly read scientific books.
I was afraid so.
Yeah,
but
they forced us to read all kinds of, novels in school.
Yeah.
But I really discovered novels and began to really love them only afterwards. As long as they kind of forced us, you have to read this, you have to read Dostoevsky because it's in the matriculation exam. So it was a kind of, I have to read this. Afterwards, when it was over, I kind of reread it and really loved it. Between 15 and 18, I almost only read history.
History.
Yeah.
And when you learned to love novels later, which one did you love?
So I revisited some of the works that we read in school, but I really loved, again, Tolstoy's War and Peace,
which is
also history.
Drama.
Yeah, but it's also history. I need to kind of rekindle my memory for novels.
Did you read a woman's novel?
I read Ursula Le Guin's, science fiction, fantasy novels. And I also read, what was her name? I don't remember the name of the author, but she wrote two, again, historical novels. The Persian Boy and something about Alexander the Great, but it focused on the love affair between Alexander and a Persian youth who was previously the lover of Darius, the Persian king. And this was one of the first kind of, before I came out, before I realized that I was gay, this was one of the first kind of novels about gay relationships that I read.
And did the reading had anything to do with the fact that you came out? No.
Not immediately. It was not like an immediate cause and effect. But I do remember that I was very kind of particularly interested in that story, and I guess it kind of percolated inside there and was important, instrumental in later kind of coming out to myself.
So reading about a love affair that's so long ago, did this help you to understand present things better? Like for you, is it better to understand things when they are set in the distance?
It puts the present in perspective. And for me, it's not such a long time ago. I mean, it's only just a little bit over 2,000 years ago. If you think about the span of human existence, which is hundreds of thousands of years, and the span of the cosmos, which is like 13 billion years, so 2,000 years is yesterday. And one of my basic feeling about history is that it's all present in a way. Nobody reads history or cares about history because of the past. Like all the people in the past are gone, they are dead. We can't change anything that happened back then, and they don't care what we think about them. Like Alexander the Great doesn't care what if you think he was great or he was not so great or whatever. The past is important because of what it tells us about the present. And the only thing that separates us from the past is just time.
Mm. Do you understand what trickled down when you read this book about your own coming out?
In a way, it expands your reality or your understanding of what could be in the universe. Like if you grow up and you only see heterosexual couples around you, so you don't even imagine that maybe two boys or two men can be a couple. And then you read the story and it expands your universe. You understand, oh, these things, these kinds of relationships, they can also be in reality. Like the laws of physics and the laws of biology don't forbid the existence of these things. Maybe human laws, maybe religion, maybe the state tries to forbid it. But states and religions forbid only things that can actually exist. Nobody bothers to issue a law forbidding people to run faster than the speed of light, because it's simply impossible. What's the point? They only issue law to forbid things that are actually part of reality, potentially.
I'm very reconciled that your scientist brain has one story that is not destructive in your own readers' biographies.
Even the kind of mythological stories that I've read, they are not destructive.
Okay.
Again, what I'm saying is that they are very powerful.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful about them.
It's interesting because now everybody says we have to fact check and give the statistics, and you actually always say that in a way we should be able to put it into a story.
Yes.
To transmit it.
A good story for me relies on facts.
Yeah,
It doesn't ignore them. But the thing, if you only fact check, if you only give the statistic, it never works. Because the only thing that can replace one story is another story. If you think about a story like a balloon, and people think, okay, I'll take this fact-checking needle and I stick hole in it and it will explode, it never explodes. If you only poke holes in the balloon, you can poke 1,000 holes, it's still there, no problem. The only thing that replaces one balloon is another balloon. If you tell a different story, a more interesting story, a story that helps people better, then you don't need to poke any holes in the other story. It will just disappear.
We have talked about stories, and we have asked you to bring books, but since you brought books on science, I really wanted to understand your concept of stories,
Yeah.
since I believe that part of the success of your books is that you do manage to sort of narrate science, as paradox as it sounds.
What I try to do is to bridge
Yeah.
the kind of facts and theories and models of science that are often don't come in the shape of a story, and shape them into a story that will be accessible to people without kind of betraying the scientific values of truth and factuality and so forth. And these are some of the books that inspired me on the way.
Which one do we want to start with?
So let's start with chimpanzee politics, because we actually talked about it already. This book that was written, I think, in the year that I was born, in 1976, by Frans de Waal, who is one, maybe the greatest primatologist of our age. And it tells the story of a single chimpanzee band, about 20 chimpanzees, living in a zoo in the Netherlands, in Arnhem, and their relationships and their politics. And basically everything we talked about is based partly on what I discovered in this book, that human politics is much like chimpanzee politics, and that these biological dramas that now are controlling entire nations and launching wars and so forth, they are the same biological dramas that you find in the struggles, in the relationships of a small group of chimpanzees. And it also relates to what we just discussed, for instance, about sexuality and what is permissible and what is forbidden. For me, not Frans de Waal, and of course below Frans de Waal you always find Charles Darwin. Darwin is the kind of prophet of sexual liberation. That if I think about the liberation of gay people, of LGBTQ people, then if you dig underneath, you eventually find Darwin. Because for, at least in the West, for centuries upon centuries, gay people were persecuted and oppressed because of this mythological idea about sex, that sex was created by God for the purpose of procreation. And if you use sex for anything else, you're sinning against the purpose of the thing, so you must be punished. And then Darwin came, and Darwin said, in biology, there are no purposes. Nothing has any purpose in biology. In biology, there are only causes. I can explain what was the causal chain of event that led to the creation, to the evolution, not creation, to the evolution of sexual organs and sexual feelings in animals and mammals and humans, but they were not created for a particular purpose. This is true of everything in biology. Like we have fingers not in order to type on computers or to play the piano or to climb trees. Fingers evolved through evolution when humans climbed trees and when humans picked fruits, or ancient apes did it. So those that had better fingers survived and left these kind of better fingers for their offspring. And similarly, if you think about wings, why do birds have wings? Wings were not created so that birds could fly. Originally, reptiles evolved feathers in order to warm themselves. And once something exists, it can be used for all the things that you can use it for. So some reptiles, when they were escaping predators, they jumped, and these feathers helped them to jump further, and they survived. and generation by generation, this became wings. So it would be ridiculous to kind of blame birds. Why are you using your wings in order to fly? They were originally meant only to warm you. If you fly with them, this is against the purpose for which they were created. This is ridiculous. And it's the same with sex. It evolved in the context of procreation. But among mammals, among chimpanzees and among rabbits and among humans, new usages evolved over time. The vast majority of sex today, not just among humans, also among chimpanzees, it's not about procreation. People use it to establish intimate bonds between themselves. And to say to people, no, that's wrong, you should not use sex to establish intimacy, it's only for procreation, this is ridiculous. It's like telling birds, don't fly. And this is, I think, the kind of deepest layer of the liberation of women, of LGBTQ people, again, the Darwinian understanding that what things don't have kind of a purpose set from above. Whatever exists is by definition in line with the laws of nature. The idea that you can act, you can do something that violates the laws of nature, this is simply ridiculous. What violates the laws of nature doesn't exist. Whatever exists, by definition, it's in line with the laws of nature. The laws of a country, that's different. Like a country can say you cannot drive more than...
But you mean the laws of nature have no moral? That you mean total free of morals, right? It's just the fact that it exists.
Yes. Of course, not everything that exists is good. People murder, and this is part of reality, and this is bad. But then you have to give an explanation. If you want to forbid something, you cannot say, I forbid it because it's against the laws of nature. There is no such thing. You need to provide an explanation. So with murder, we know the explanation. Murder is bad because it causes tremendous suffering, not just to the person you murder, but to everybody around them, their family, their friends. So it's bad because it causes suffering. Now, if two men love each other, how does it cause anybody to suffer? If you think you want to forbid it, you need to come up with a better argument than, oh, it's against the laws of nature.
And Yuval, may I come back to when you talked about the turtles first and the fact that the mother disappears, and when you read that book, and then you mentioned Freud. So how do you look at psychoanalytics as an explanation tool for these things?
It's a very powerful tool. It's, again, exploring the mythological and the psychological mechanisms that shape and motivate humans. And if you try to take psychoanalysis and understand turtles, it will not work. If you try to understand atoms and subatomic particles, it will not work. But with humans, it works. And to some extent, it will also work with chimpanzees.
And there's also women that are famous with the research on chimpanzees, like Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
Was she important for you?
I've read her books also. And also, you know, the amazing thing about her work is, you know, the brilliance of the simplicity. That you had all these people in universities in Oxford and Harvard arguing about what apes do and don't do, and she said, I'll just go and look. And you know, she started in such a simple way. So I'll just go and live with the chimpanzees and look at them and see how they behave. Not in laboratories, not in zoos, but directly. And she also, one of the revolutions that she did in the study of animals was treat them as individuals with really a psychology and a personality. She started to give them names, whereas previously it was kind of common in most of the research on apes and other animals to use, you know, numbers. And it was a big sin to kind of treat other animals as persons, because this was humanizing them. Like we kind of take our own human emotions and whatever and kind of impose them on the animals. And she was one of the people who kind of reversed it. No, I mean, the assumption that emotions, for instance, are a uniquely human thing, it goes against everything that Darwin taught us. The basic assumption is that it's much more widespread in the animal kingdom than just a unique human phenomenon. And she was one of the first scientists who began to treat other animals as persons with emotions, with a psychological life, and she would give them names and write about them in scientific papers with their names and not with numbers. And today this is like a common fact that every animal researchers that studies apes or whatever takes for granted, that yes, other animals also have emotions and have psychological needs, and no two chimpanzees are exactly the same, and so forth.
Now that we are at the individual, there's one book I really want to know about, and that is a book that talks about the self and the way identity shapes, or a person shapes its identity. When did you read this book, and what did you learn from it?
I think I've read Sources of the Self by Charles Taylor in my early 20s. And it's more coming from the direction of philosophy and the history of philosophy, and does a brilliant job in showing how our most basic understanding of ourselves, it has a history behind it. It's not the way that people in every age, in every culture understood themselves. It's the outcome of 2,000 years, of Greek philosophy and Christian theology and modern philosophy and modern art that resulted in the very kind of unique way that Western modern people understand what am I. And this is one of the most fascinating things in life, also in science, that you take something which seems to be extremely kind of solid and self-evident, and when you look closer, you see that there is actually an entire universe of change inside it, that it's not obvious at all, and it's not permanent at all. That, for a lot of people in the modern West, like the whole of the universe is constantly changing, but there is something inside us which is the basic atom of, say, our mental life, which doesn't change. This is the basic unit of the mental universe. And the same way that physicists looked inside the atom and realized, actually, this is not solid at all. There are lots of changes within this tiny thing. So also philosophers like Charles Taylor and psychologists and others, they looked into this kind of mental atom of the self and realized, like the physical atom, it's not solid at all. It's contains not just multitude of subparticles, but they are constantly moving and interacting and changing.
That was something that both helped you understand, like the human nature of of mankind or human beings. But did it help you understand something about yourself?
Yes, that what I define as myself itself needs a lot more exploration. That you think you know yourself, but you don't. Not just, the kind of individual events of your life. Your very understanding of what is a self is far from self-evident. And it is itself the product of a lot of stories and mythologies which are not necessarily true.
So the last book that we can only touch for a few thoughts, but maybe tell us why it's important, Jared Diamond.
It's a work of big history, kind of covering thousands of years of human history and trying to understand the kind of basic processes, what shapes history. And for me, the book was extremely important in my life, in my career, not just for its kind of particular insights, but more for its shape. That it showed me that you can write such books, and which was then the basis for my work, that you can actually write a science book, not a mythological book, but a science book based on the latest findings and archaeological excavations and genetic evidence and economic models, and tell the story of thousands of years of history. You don't need to just focus on very, very small events or incidents or places. You can really tell big stories which will still be scientific and not just mythological.
So this was the book where you learned you can sort of merge the reader that you were between 7 and 11, the myth and the science, and you learned I can merge this and make it one bigger book and sort of get rid of the dilemma that you have with the myth and connect it to facts.
This kind of false dilemma, that I like the shape of the mythological stories, but I also like the factuality, the accuracy of history and of science, and I have to choose. So Jared Diamond, in a way, said, no, you don't have to choose. You can try and combine. You can integrate, which is, of course, very difficult, but not impossible. And you have to kind of make compromises. Like in every relationship, in every integration, you need to make compromises. So also in this compromise between myth and science, it won't be perfect. You will have to make compromises, but it's worth it.
In your writing and reading, but mostly your writing, if you would not have the story and the myth, what would you lack?
The interest. What many of the kind of purely scientific texts lack is that people don't connect to them and they don't inspire people. And again, we have to work with humans as they are. We can't say, well, humans are faulty and we will just stay with the facts and the statistics and the mathematics and give humans up. No. What I'm doing in my books, it's not negating the other types of research in science. I don't say that all scientists now should write these big narratives. Without the very specialized researchers, somebody who works for 10 years on just excavating a single archaeological site and kind of very detailed lists and catalogs of every bone and every piece of tool that they found there. Without this type of extremely difficult work, I will not be able to do my work. My work is just to build a bridge between these kinds of scientific studies and try to convey their insights, their discoveries to the general public in a way that anybody can relate to and find interesting.
You do succeed. You do inspire people. Who's a person that inspired you? One person.
As a scholar, both Jared Diamond and Franz de Waal were two of the biggest intellectual or scholarly inspirations for me. And exactly for this ability, for building this bridge. Because I remember the experience of myself reading Chimpanzee Politics and being so interested and laughing at some of the characters and interactions that he described and feeling sad for some of the other and really getting kind of connected to the politics of this group of chimpanzees. And There's so many other previous studies written about chimpanzees, but in these very cold, scientific, like you don't have names, you have numbers, and you don't talk about the emotions, you just have these statistics about how many times they met and how many times they fought, and it would not have had the same effect.
Yuval, that is it. Thank you very much for sharing your books, the people that inspired you, your thoughts, and the dilemma that I was able to explore a little bit with you. Thanks a lot for coming to the show.
Thank you.